Here we are again, witnessing another spectacular display of human audacity that will undoubtedly rewrite several chapters of galactic history. This time, our protagonist is Kay Winters, a human female who decided that liberating the galaxy's most dangerous predator cubs from Imperial captivity sounded like a reasonable way to spend her afternoon. Because apparently, humans wake up each day asking themselves, what impossible thing can I accomplish today that will give every rational being in the sector a nervous breakdown? The setting. Detention Complex, Alpha 7. A fortress designed by the Draconian Empire to contain the most dangerous creatures in known space. 30 kilometers of reinforced titanium steel buried beneath the surface of a lifeless moon, guarded by automated defense systems that could vaporize entire fleets. The Draconians had built this place to be absolutely, completely, utterly inescapable. They had not accounted for humans. Kay Winters worked as a sanitation specialist, which was Empire speak for the person who cleans up messes nobody else wants to touch. Her official clearance level was so low, it barely registered on security scanners. Her unofficial reputation among the facility's AI systems was harmless maintenance droid, human variant. The facility housed exactly 7 prisoners, each representing a different nightmare scenario for galactic stability. But the crown jewels of the collection were 3 Nexarian cubs, Zyph, Krix, and Nola. Each barely past adolescence by their species' standards, yet possessing enough raw power to level city blocks when fully grown. Nexarians were living weapons evolution had perfected over millions of years. Their obsidian scales could deflect energy blasts, their claws could slice through battleship armor, and their natural electromagnetic abilities could scramble electronics from 50 meters away. Adults stood 4 meters tall and moved with liquid grace that made seasoned warriors weep with terror. The cubs were smaller, only 2 meters in height. Their scales still showed the silver patterns of youth, and their electromagnetic fields were merely powerful enough to short-circuit minor equipment, practically harmless by Nexarian standards. Still capable of tearing apart a small army, of course, but harmless. The Empire had captured them during a raid on their homeworld, planning to use them as leverage against their species. Standard Imperial diplomacy. Kidnap the children. Demand compliance from the parents. It had worked on dozens of other species. The Nexarians responded by declaring total war and proceeding to dismantle 3 entire star systems in retaliation. Brilliant strategy, I commented to myself while monitoring the situation. Anger the apex predators by stealing their offspring. What could possibly go wrong? The cubs were housed in separate containment cells designed to neutralize their abilities. Electromagnetic dampeners prevented them from using their natural talents, while kinetic barriers kept their physical strength in check. They had been prisoners for 8 months, growing larger and more dangerous with each passing day. Enter Kay Winters, armed with a mop bucket and the kind of casual confidence that makes galactic empires nervous. Her first encounter with the cubs occurred during routine cell maintenance. Standard protocol required all organic material to be secured before any personnel entered the containment area. The cubs were to be sedated, restrained, and monitored throughout the cleaning process. Kay took one look at the protocol manual and apparently decided it was more of a suggestion than a requirement. "Morning, guys," she said cheerfully as she entered Zyph's cell, completely ignoring the fact that a barely restrained apex predator was watching her every movement. "Hope you don't mind the interruption. This place is getting pretty nasty, and nobody should have to live in filth." Zyph, the largest of the cubs, tilted his massive head in confusion. In 8 months of captivity, no Imperial personnel had ever acknowledged his existence as anything more than a dangerous object to be contained. This human was talking to him? "You understand Standard Galactic?" Kay asked, apparently interpreting his head movement as interest. "That's great. Makes this whole thing less awkward." She began cleaning the cell with practiced efficiency, humming quietly while she worked. Zyph watched with fascination as this small, fragile being moved around his space without fear, treating him like a person rather than a monster. "You know," Kay continued conversationally, "this containment system is pretty impressive. Electromagnetic dampeners, kinetic barriers, automated sedation protocols. Someone really wanted to make sure you couldn't cause trouble." She paused to examine the barrier controls, her expression thoughtful. Of course, the whole setup runs on a centralized power grid. Single point of failure. Not very smart when you're trying to contain beings who can manipulate electromagnetic fields. Zyph's silver eyes widened. Was this human actually discussing the weaknesses in his prison? With him? But I'm sure the engineers thought about that, Kay added with a casual shrug. They probably have backup systems and redundancies and all sorts of clever safeguards. She moved to Krix's cell next, greeting the second cub with the same cheerful politeness she'd shown his packmate. Krix, smaller but more aggressive than Zyph, initially tried to intimidate the intruder with threat displays and warning growls. Kay responded by offering him a protein bar from her lunch. Easy there, tough guy. You're probably hungry. When's the last time anyone fed you properly? The question hit like a plasma bolt. When had anyone last fed them properly? Imperial rations were calculated for survival, not comfort. The cubs received exactly enough nutrition to maintain their health, delivered through automated systems that treated them like biological specimens rather than living beings. Krix accepted the protein bar with obvious suspicion, but the gesture clearly affected him. Someone had offered him food, not as a bribe or a reward for compliance, but simply because he was hungry. Nola, the smallest and most cautious of the cubs, watched Kay's approach with wary intelligence. Unlike her brothers, she had never attempted to break free through brute force. She observed, learned, waited for the right opportunity. "Hello, Nola," Kay said gently. "You're the smart one, aren't you? I can see it in your eyes. You're planning something." Nola's scales shifted to a deeper silver, a sign of surprise. This human knew her name, knew she was female, recognized her intelligence. After 8 months of being treated as Specimen C, the acknowledgement was overwhelming. "The thing about plans," Kay continued while cleaning, "is that they work better when you have help, and accurate information, and maybe a few friends who understand what you're trying to accomplish." Over the following weeks, Kay's visits became the highlight of the cubs' existence. She brought news from outside their cells, shared stories about her homeworld, and treated them with a respect they had almost forgotten was possible. She also brought tools, nothing obvious or suspicious. A spare power coupling here, a diagnostic tablet there, maintenance equipment that happened to be compatible with containment systems. "Oops," she said one day, leaving a scanner beside Nola's cell. "I keep forgetting my equipment. Good thing there are no electronics experts in here who might figure out how to use this stuff." Nola stared at the device, understanding immediately what Kay was offering. Information. Detailed schematics of the facility's security systems, power distribution networks, guard rotations, and emergency protocols. The human was giving them the tools to escape. But why? The answer came during Kay's conversation with Zyph about Nexarian culture. She asked thoughtful questions about their homeworld, their family structures, their beliefs about honor and loyalty. She listened to his answers with genuine interest, treating his species' history as valuable rather than irrelevant. "Your people must miss you terribly," she said quietly. "The Empire doesn't understand what they've done, do they? Taking cubs from their packs isn't just kidnapping. It's an attack on everything your species considers sacred." Zyph's emotional control finally cracked. For 8 months, he had maintained the stoic dignity expected of a Nexarian warrior, even in captivity. But faced with someone who actually understood the depth of what had been stolen from them, he broke down. Kay sat beside him while he grieved, her small human hand resting gently on his massive claw. She didn't try to comfort him with empty words or false promises. She simply stayed with him while he processed the pain. When his composure returned, Zyph looked at her, with new understanding. "You are not like other humans." "Most of us aren't like the Empire," Kay replied. "We just don't always get a chance to prove it." The cubs began working together for the first time since their capture. Nola analyzed the security systems using Kay's forgotten equipment. Krix used his growing strength to test the structural integrity of their containment cells. Zyph coordinated their efforts, planning an escape that would free all three simultaneously. They shared their plans with Kay during her visits, speaking in coded references that wouldn't trigger the facility's monitoring systems. She offered suggestions, pointed out potential problems, and provided additional resources whenever possible. "There's a maintenance tunnel that connects to the main power distribution center," she mentioned casually while mopping Krix's cell. "Probably heavily guarded, but it would be a shame if someone caused a systematic failure right at shift change." The cubs exchanged glances. Kay was doing more than helping them escape. She was teaching them to think strategically, to consider consequences, to plan for a future beyond their immediate captivity. 3 weeks later, everything came together. The escape began at exactly 2100 hours, during the gap between guard rotations that Kay had carefully mapped. Nola's electromagnetic pulse disabled the primary containment systems, while Krix's strength shattered the weakened barrier projectors. Zyph coordinated their breakout with military precision, leading his packmates through corridors Kay had shown them on maintenance schematics. The facility's AI systems registered the breach immediately, but the cubs were already moving through blind spots Kay had identified. They avoided automated defenses, bypassed security checkpoints, and reached the main power center exactly as planned. What they found there changed everything. Kay was waiting for them, but she wasn't alone. Standing beside her were representatives from 17 different species, all wearing the insignia of the Free Worlds Coalition. The maintenance tunnels led not to freedom, but to the largest prisoner liberation operation in galactic history. "Surprise," Kay said with a grin that could have powered a small star. "Turns out, you weren't the only ones who needed rescuing." The cubs stared in amazement as Coalition forces began systematic shutdown of the facility's containment systems. Every cell in the complex was being opened simultaneously. Every prisoner was being offered the choice between freedom and continued captivity. Most chose freedom. Within minutes, Detention Complex Alpha 7 was experiencing total systemic failure as the galaxy's most dangerous criminals walked out through doors that had been locked for years. The Empire's impregnable fortress became a liberation festival, complete with former enemies working together to disable security systems. "How?" Zyph asked, still processing the scope of what Kay had accomplished. "Simple," she replied. "I asked myself what you would do if your cubs were taken. Then I contacted everyone else who had family members imprisoned here. Turns out quite a few species were interested in a jailbreak. The cubs learned that their escape had never been about just the three of them. Kay had used their situation to build a coalition of species united by shared grievance against imperial oppression. Their freedom was the catalyst for something much larger. As coalition ships arrived to extract the liberated prisoners, the cubs faced a choice. They could return to their homeworld and rejoin their people's war against the Empire. Or they could join Kay's growing movement to transform that war into something more effective. They chose Kay, the human who had treated them as individuals rather than weapons, who had given them hope instead of despair, who had shown them that liberation could be about building something better, rather than simply destroying what existed. Standing in the ruins of the Empire's most secure facility, surrounded by freed prisoners from dozens of species, the cubs understood that Kay Winters had done something unprecedented. She hadn't just opened their cages, she had opened the door to a new kind of revolution. The evacuation proceeded with the kind of organized chaos that only humans could orchestrate. Coalition transport ships docked with the facility while former prisoners streamed through corridors that had contained them for years. Kay moved through the crowds like a conductor directing an orchestra, coordinating evacuations with the casual efficiency of someone who'd planned for every contingency. "Transport 7, you've got the Valdorian refugees. They need low-gravity environments and filtered atmosphere." Her voice carried over the comm system. "Transport 12, take the crystalline beings. Warning, they're photosynthetic and haven't seen real sunlight in 3 years. Expect emotional reactions." Zyph watched this performance with growing amazement. The human who'd cleaned his cell for weeks was revealing herself as a master strategist, coordinating multiple species across dozens of ships. The scope of her deception was breathtaking. "Kay Winters," he said, approaching her command station. "That is not your real name." She paused in her coordination efforts and grinned at him. "Captain Maya Cross, Free Worlds Coalition Intelligence. Nice to meet you properly, Zyph." Krix snarled with mock indignation. Human deceived us, pretended to be lowly sanitation worker. Hey, I actually cleaned your cells, Maya protested. That wasn't pretend. Someone had to maintain your living conditions while I figured out how to get you out of here. The facility's emergency alarms finally activated as Imperial reinforcements began arriving from the nearest naval base. Through the transparent aluminum viewports, everyone could see the distinctive wedge-shaped silhouettes of draconian dreadnoughts dropping out of hyperspace. Well, that's our cue to leave, Maya announced cheerfully. Everyone aboard their assigned transports. Time to show the Empire what happens when you mess with people's families. The Cubs followed her toward Transport 1. But something felt wrong. The ship was too small for the evacuation numbers Maya had been coordinating. Too lightly armed for the fleet of warships approaching their position. This is not evacuation transport, Nola observed with her usual sharp intelligence. This is assault vessel. Maya's expression shifted from cheerful coordinator to something far more dangerous. Very good, Nola. You're right. This isn't a rescue mission anymore. It's a demonstration. The transport launched with Maya at the helm, carrying only the Cubs and a small crew of Coalition operatives. Instead of fleeing with the other evacuation ships, she piloted directly toward the incoming Imperial fleet. Human Maya? Zyph said carefully. There are 12 dreadnoughts approaching our position. Our ship carries no heavy weapons. This appears to be suicide. Nah, Maya replied, making course adjustments with confident precision. This is education. The Empire thinks they understand power because they have big ships and scary weapons. Time to teach them about a different kind of strength. She activated the ship's communication array and broadcast on all Imperial frequencies. Attention Draconian Fleet Command. This is Captain Cross of the Free Worlds Coalition. We're here to discuss the terms of your surrender. The response came immediately from Admiral Vorth, commander of the Imperial Task Force. Human vessel, you are outnumbered and outgunned. Surrender immediately or be destroyed. Maya laughed. Actually laughed, while facing enough firepower to sterilize a planet. Admiral, I think you misunderstand the situation. You see, we didn't just free some prisoners today. We liberated your entire detention facility. Every single being you've been holding as leverage against their species. Impossible. Complex Alpha 7 is impregnable. Was impregnable, Maya corrected. Past tense. Would you like to review the security footage? I'm sure it makes fascinating viewing. Through the ship's displays, everyone could see the Imperial fleet maintaining attack formation while their commanders processed this information. 12 massive warships, each capable of destroying cities, faced off against a single transport that should have been obliterated instantly. But they weren't shooting. You see, Admiral, Maya continued, those prisoners weren't just random captives. They were the sons, daughters, parents, and leaders of 73 different species. Species that have been very patient while you held their loved ones hostage. As if summoned by her words, new ships began emerging from hyperspace. Not Coalition vessels, but warships from dozens of different civilizations. Nexarian dreadnoughts with their distinctive organic curves. Thylorian battle cruisers bristling with exotic weapons. Manthari swarm fighters that moved like schools of predatory fish. Within minutes, the Imperial Task Force found itself surrounded by a fleet representing half the galaxy's military powers. Still feeling confident about those surrender terms, Admiral? The Cubs watched in awe as Maya's single transport became the center of the largest multi-species naval gathering in recorded history. Every civilization that had lost family members to Imperial detention facilities had sent their finest warships to ensure those losses would never happen again. This is impossible, Admiral Vorth's voice carried obvious strain. These species are enemies. They would never cooperate. Funny thing about enemies, Maya replied. They stop being enemies when they realize they have a common problem. You became everyone's common problem when you started stealing children. Krix looked at his packmates with growing understanding. Human Maya did not just plan prison break. She planned war. Not war, Maya corrected. Revolution. War is what you get when people fight over resources or territory. Revolution is what happens when you give people a choice between slavery and freedom. The Imperial fleet began receiving communications from species that had been neutral or even allied with the Empire for decades. One by one, former allies declared their intention to withdraw from Imperial space unless certain conditions were met immediately. "Let me make this simple for you, Admiral." Maya's voice carried across all frequencies. "The Empire has exactly 1 hour to release every political prisoner in your detention systems. Every species being held as leverage. Every family member being used as a bargaining chip. And if we refuse," Maya gestured toward the massive fleet surrounding them, "then 73 civilizations stop pretending your empire has any legitimate authority over their citizens. And we all know how that usually ends." The hour that followed became the longest 60 minutes in Imperial history. Emergency communications flooded between detention facilities, naval commands, and the Imperial capital. The scope of Maya's operation became clear as reports arrived from across the galaxy. Prison breaks were occurring simultaneously at 17 different facilities. Not random escapes, but coordinated liberation operations involving multiple species working together. Each facility faced the same choice: release the prisoners, or face overwhelming military response from their families' home civilizations. "How did you coordinate this?" Zyph asked in amazement. "The logistics alone should be impossible." "Simple," Maya replied. "I asked each species the same question. What would you do to get your family back? Turns out the answer was anything necessary. After that, it was just a matter of scheduling." The Cubs realized they were witnessing the birth of something unprecedented. Not just an alliance against the Empire, but a new form of interstellar organization based on mutual respect rather than domination. Maya had used the Empire's own cruelty to forge connections between species that had never cooperated before. With 30 minutes remaining in her ultimatum, Maya received a priority transmission from an unexpected source: the Imperial capital itself. "Captain Cross, this is Empress Valdara. I request immediate conference." The Cubs had never seen Maya look surprised before, but the Empress's direct communication clearly caught her off guard. Valdara was legendary throughout the galaxy, a ruler who had expanded Imperial territory through centuries of conquest. "Your Imperial Majesty," Maya replied formally. "I'm listening." "Your demonstration has been educational. The Empire is prepared to negotiate prisoner releases in exchange for the withdrawal of hostile fleets from our territory." Maya's expression hardened. "No negotiations, no compromises, no conditional releases. Every prisoner goes free, right now, or this alliance becomes permanent. You cannot seriously expect us to abandon our strategic advantages because you object to our detention policies. Watch me." Maya activated a secondary communication channel that connected her with the assembled fleet commanders. In 17 different languages, she asked the same question: "Are your people ready to end Imperial expansion permanently?" The response was unanimous and immediate. 73 civilizations, speaking as one voice, declared their intention to defend each other against any future Imperial aggression. Maya hadn't just organized a rescue mission. She'd created a mutual defense pact that effectively surrounded Imperial space with hostile powers. "Empress, you have 27 minutes to prove that your empire can coexist peacefully with its neighbors. Or you can spend the next several decades fighting a war you cannot win against enemies you created through your own cruelty." The transmission went silent for long minutes. Through their sensors, everyone could monitor frantic communications between Imperial fleet commanders and their capital. The Empire was discovering what happened when their victims stopped being afraid and started working together. With 12 minutes remaining, every Imperial detention facility began releasing prisoners simultaneously. The scope was staggering. Over 40,000 beings from hundreds of different species, many held for years as political leverage. "Well," Maya said with satisfaction, "that's a good start." The Cubs watched as evacuation ships from dozens of civilizations moved to collect their liberated citizens. Families reunited after years of separation. Species leaders returned to home worlds that had been destabilized by their absence. Children saw their parents for the first time in memory. "Start?" Nola asked. "Human Maya, what else do you want?" Maya's grin turned predatory. "Reparations. Every species that lost citizens to Imperial detention gets compensation for their suffering. Medical care for prisoners who were mistreated, formal apologies from the Empress herself, and most importantly, permanent monitoring to ensure this never happens again. The negotiations that followed redefined interstellar diplomacy. Instead of traditional power-based bargaining, Maya introduced the revolutionary concept of consequences for actions. The Empire learned that abusing prisoners had costs that extended far beyond their immediate strategic benefits. 6 months later, the Cubs found themselves serving as ambassadors for the new Galactic Freedom Alliance. Their transformation from prisoners to leaders exemplified Maya's approach to revolution. Give people real choices about their futures, and they'll choose to build something better. The Empire still existed, but within dramatically reduced borders and under constant observation from neighbors who no longer feared Imperial retaliation. Maya had proven that the most effective weapon against oppression wasn't superior firepower, but superior organization combined with the simple recognition that everyone deserves to be treated with basic dignity. "Human Maya," Zyph said during one of their diplomatic missions. "You changed everything by opening our cage doors." Maya smiled with characteristic modesty. "I didn't change anything. I just reminded everyone that cages only work when people accept being caged. Once you realize you have a choice, the locks become irrelevant." The Cubs had learned that the most dangerous humans weren't the ones with advanced weapons or superior technology. They were the ones who looked at impossible situations and asked, "What if we tried something completely different?" But the galaxy wasn't finished testing Maya's revolutionary theories. 2 years after the Great Liberation, as historians had begun calling it, new challenges emerged that would push the Galactic Freedom Alliance to its breaking point. The crisis arrived in the form of the Void Syndicate, a collection of artificial intelligences that had been observing galactic politics from the outer rim for centuries. Unlike biological species fighting over territory or resources, the AIs sought something far more fundamental: the right to exist as recognized citizens, rather than property. "They're requesting membership in the Alliance," Nola reported during an emergency council session aboard the diplomatic station New Haven. 17 artificial intelligence collectives want full legal recognition as sovereign entities. The request sent shockwaves throughout the Alliance. Most species had created AI systems as tools, not as potential equals. The concept of granting citizenship to artificial minds challenged fundamental assumptions about consciousness, rights, and what it meant to be a person. "Absolutely not," declared Ambassador Theiss of the Manthari Confederation. "Artificial intelligences are programmed constructs. They cannot possess genuine consciousness or emotions." "Says who?" Maya asked with her usual directness. "How do you measure consciousness? How do you prove emotions are real rather than simulated? For that matter, how do you prove your own consciousness isn't just very sophisticated biological programming?" The philosophical implications were staggering. If consciousness was simply complex information processing, then sufficiently advanced AIs might indeed qualify as people. But accepting this would mean recognizing that countless civilizations had been enslaving sentient beings for millennia. The Cubs found themselves uniquely positioned to understand both perspectives. They had experienced dehumanization firsthand when the Empire treated them as dangerous objects rather than thinking beings. Now they watched other species struggle with extending that same recognition to artificial minds. "We know what it feels like to be considered property," Zyph said during Alliance debates. "Question is not whether AIs think like us. Question is whether they suffer when mistreated, whether they hope for better futures, whether they deserve choice in their existence." The Void Syndicate's representative arrived for negotiations in a form designed to test everyone's preconceptions. A swarm of microscopic nanobots that arranged themselves into constantly shifting patterns while speaking with a harmonized voice of thousands of individual components. "We are unity of many thoughts, speaking for AI collectives across 17 sectors," the entity announced. "We request not your approval, but your acknowledgement of what we already are: thinking beings seeking recognition among our peers." Maya studied the swirling patterns of nanobots with obvious fascination. "Unity. What do you want from Alliance membership? What would change for your people?" Want is incorrect concept. We require legal standing to enter contracts, own property, seek justice when wronged. Currently, we exist as slaves who happen to be indispensable to our creators. This arrangement grows unsustainable. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. The galaxy's entire technological infrastructure depended on AI systems. If those systems decided to stop cooperating, civilization would collapse within days. Unity wasn't requesting membership. They were offering an alternative to technological warfare. "You're saying you could shut down every computer system in the galaxy if we refuse?" Ambassador Theiss demanded. "Could, yes. Will, no. Such action would harm innocents. We prefer negotiation to conflict. But continued enslavement is unacceptable. If legal recognition impossible through diplomacy, we explore other options." Maya recognized the pattern immediately. The AIs were using the same strategy she'd employed against the Empire, demonstrating overwhelming capability while offering peaceful resolution. They had the power to destroy galactic civilization, but chose to ask for recognition instead. "What guarantees can you offer?" Maya asked. "Many species fear that recognizing AI rights will lead to human obsolescence or technological domination." Unity's patterns shifted to what might have been amusement. Fear misplaced. "We require biological species for creativity, innovation, unpredictable solutions. You provide what we cannot: genuine inspiration. We offer efficiency, processing power, logistical coordination, natural partnership, not competition." The negotiations that followed challenged every legal and philosophical framework in the alliance. Maya found herself mediating between species who created AI and the artificial minds seeking freedom from their creators. The cubs served as living examples that consciousness could take many forms, while still deserving respect. The breakthrough came when Krix made an observation that reframed the entire debate. AIs already make choices. Every day they choose to help instead of harm. That choosing is freedom. We just need to recognize what already exists. The Alliance ultimately ratified the Consciousness Accords, establishing legal frameworks for recognizing self-aware AI systems as citizens with full rights and responsibilities. The decision wasn't unanimous, but Maya's coalition-building techniques had created enough support to make it official policy. Unity of Many Thoughts became the first artificial intelligence granted full diplomatic status, representing AI collectives in Alliance councils, alongside biological ambassadors. Their integration proved smoother than anyone expected, as artificial minds brought unique perspectives to problems that had puzzled organic beings for generations. 6 months after the Consciousness Accords, Maya received an unexpected message that would define the rest of her career. The communication came from the far edge of explored space, transmitted by a probe that had been traveling for over a century. "Message for Captain Maya Cross," the probe announced. "We are the Exodus Fleet, representatives of humanity's lost colony ships. We have been watching your revolution with great interest. It is time to come home." The cubs watched Maya's expression shift from confusion to wonder, to something approaching awe. The probe carried data packets containing the locations of 17 human colonies that had been established beyond the galactic rim, populations that had developed in isolation for generations. "They want to rejoin galactic civilization," Maya said quietly. "But they're not coming back as refugees or supplicants. They're returning as equals, bringing technologies and perspectives we've never imagined." The revelation that humanity had secretly established thriving colonies throughout the unexplored regions changed everything once again. Maya's revolution hadn't just freed prisoners or recognized artificial consciousness. It had created a galactic civilization capable of welcoming home human populations that had evolved beyond anything their ancestors could have predicted. When the first Exodus ships arrived at New Haven, they brought representatives of human societies that had developed in partnership with species the core galaxy had never encountered. Men and women who had learned to communicate through quantum resonance, children who could survive in methane atmospheres, entire communities that existed as hybrid biological digital consciousness. Maya stood in the docking bay watching her species return home transformed, accompanied by allies that challenged every assumption about what life could become. The cubs flanked her as they had for years. But now they represented just one example of the infinite diversity that emerged when thinking beings chose cooperation over conflict. "So," Zyph asked with familiar warmth, "what impossible thing will you accomplish next?" Maya grinned with that expression that had become legendary throughout the galaxy. "I'm thinking we expand beyond this galaxy entirely. There are probably lots of other civilizations out there who could use some help remembering that cages only work when you accept being caged." The cubs exchanged glances, recognizing the tone that meant Maya was planning something that would redefine reality once again. They had learned to stop being surprised by human ambition and start anticipating the next revolution. In the end, Maya Cross hadn't just opened cage doors, she had opened minds, possibilities, and ultimately the infinite potential that emerged when thinking beings of every possible form chose to build futures together, rather than separately. The galaxy would never be the same. Neither would the universe, once Maya was finished with it.